Welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is the Farmer Rapid Fire, and joining me now is Chris Robson. He's sales agronomist in the Essex, Kent area. Um, I gotta tell you, it has been a challenging spring here in Ontario, and I can only imagine, Chris, what it's like down in your neck of the woods. So, what are your farmers facing in your area?
Yeah, we were, kind of talking prior to the interview, but like it's almost a tale of two cities. We've got some stuff that's off to an excellent start. Some corn that's 6, 8 leaf and moving right along, and soybeans were planted. And in some cases, in April, growers are planting soybeans, ahead of corn. So we've got some fields that are off to a great start. And then other areas, in some of the heavier dirt that we deal with, the rain hasn't been very kind, and growers are just kind of finishing planting this week or hopefully late next week, and then we'll start potentially dealing with some replants, emergence, because of the rain and some of the soil conditions has caused some problems for growers, unfortunately, right? So, overall, been a pretty good spring, really, in the grand scheme of things. Definitely been through worse, but every year brings its different set of challenges, right?
Now, I sort of feel like I'm in a bit of a time warp here. I feel like it was the spring that like took forever and then now has like evaporated. And so you're right, we're here, mid-ish June. What are the main reasons for some of the replants? Is it like that the a crust, or was it like just, could not break through? Like what happened to some of these replant fields?
Bit of both. Like in some cases with some of the early beans we had, growers are planting to moisture, whereas hindsight we should have went a little bit shallower. Those are fairly minor kind of thing, right? Hard to say at the time what the right call was. Do you plant to moisture or do you wait? But at hindsight we should have waited. The majority of the heavier dirt has been just trying to get that ground underneath to dry out in a lot of cases, right? So we were pushing planting a little bit in some cases. And then we caught some unexpected rain. So instead of, getting like a tenth or two, like they were talking, we got 2 inches. So it hasn't been so much crusting, but just, really compaction, heavy rains, trying to get those beans out. They're staying in the ground longer. So we were colder, obviously, a bit earlier on. So things like Rhizoctonia pythium, some of the wet rots are really starting to hit them, dampening off. And then lots of bug calls this year too.
Oh,
So corn
okay.
seed maggot's been a big one. See more of that. The normal grubs for some of the stuff that did get up. A lot of the no-till fields dealing with some grubs, and then to deal with a little bit of light dirt, but black cutworm by times too. But a lot of it just heavy, wet dirt that didn't plant maybe 100%, and then unfortunately received some heavy rains, and the beans just aren't going to make it.
Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, I'm glad you brought up the insect question because, of course, I think when plants are struggling to emerge, if you've got that insect pressure, it can be really devastating when you've already got perhaps a weakened crop or a thin stand. That's a tough call. Another of the tough calls, of course, to make is that spraying pass and the weed control pass. When weather isn't working in your favor, the spray pass can be one of those challenging ones. So where are farmers at, sort of on making the call there?
Yeah, so in some cases we've had a lot of calls because of late. We had the choice: do I plant or do I spray, kind of thing, right? So in a lot of cases they planted, which is a good thing, right? And then some of the ground that was in, wind has been the other concern. So there hasn't been I'd say a lot of great spray days either. So even if you had the crop in and it's been in good shape, haven't had a lot of chances to get back in where it's been safe. We deal in an area where there's a lot of like vegetable crops and sensitive things in the area too. So growers have to be kind of ultra cautious by the times. So it does create some extra things to certainly think about, right? But the good areas for the most part, growers got a good pre-emerge on corn, but some of that stuff was planted mid to late April. Like it's been in the ground 6 to 8 weeks, and those rows haven't exactly closed in. So now we're getting a lot of late calls. Thistles has been a big one, dandelions, some fleabane. We have giant ragweed down here, which always kind of comes in late. So trying to help growers work through that. The good news is, in general, that there's some pretty good options that we can use, off 8 leaf to kind of get ahead of some of those things. But soybeans is probably the harder one, right? So if they didn't get that good residual kind of program down early, unfortunately our in-crop options are a little bit limited. So here we deal with, we've got glyphosate-resistant Canada fleabane. We've got glyphosate-resistant giant ragweed, and water hemp is definitely in the area. It's not everywhere or widespread, but it's definitely something that the growers need to kind of consider if they're, when making their herbicide selection. So a lot of the talk has been, hey, I planted my beans, they're up. I did not get a residual program down, so what are my options, right? And then so a lot of that comes back to asking questions, what weeds you're dealing with, what history, rotation, because I mentioned veggie crops and different things becomes a big question too. So it does limit some of our options in a few cases.
Mm-hmm. Now, you coming back to that question of replants, we are still ahead of the shortest day of the year, but it is rapidly approaching. What goes into the discussion of, what you replant as far as maturity dates and those sorts of things? What goes into that equation?
The nice part down here is because of the area that we cover, like we're some of the the longest heat unit areas in the in the country, right? So we don't have to worry as much about maturity on soybeans as some other areas. So we'd back it off a little bit, but nothing too extreme, just because of the amount of heat that we do get. The bigger question in a lot of cases is just trying to help them evaluate the stand. So there's all kinds of data out there. There's a ton of nuance that goes into replant situations. I'm a big believer if we can make the first stand work, that should be our goal kind of thing, right? If that's going to get us through the season, then we can avoid the replant. Most cases that's going to result in a better crop than coming back into replant. But the hard part is, you can have situations where 90,000 plants per acre in soybeans is going to fit, the bill quite well. On some of the heavier dirt, you're going to want more, traditionally probably that 120,000. The problem is that there's no like black and white, rule kind of thing, right? And usually when you get out there, it's almost like a damned if you don't, damned if you don't, situation. The clay can be kind of nice in some of those cases where it's pretty obvious that yes, this is not coming. We're going to replant. The harder part becomes where, you have spots in the field that are 60, 70,000 that would warrant a replant, but then you've got other spots in the field that are 140, 160,000 and definitely don't, warrant a replant. So then you start thinking about, soil type, date. So the later we get, the less growing time we have, variety, which one we have. Is a branchy variety? Are they planting wider rows or narrow rows? And how patchy is it too, right? So, do we have just small pockets where we have lower populations or is it more widespread? One of the tools that's been nice, if you follow me on Twitter, been utilizing the drone quite a bit now, more on corn, frankly, but it's been really nice to evaluate stands, versus trying to walk it to get that, 300-foot view and really trying to help evaluate, what are we looking at, right? It's awfully hard walking the field to know kind of, where to stop and where to start, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that variability, you're right. Sometimes it's nice when the decision's easy in that it all looks terrible. That's the easy call. It's when you've got those patches of, yeah, it looks terrible, but the rest of the field, maybe not bad. So I love it. Yeah, getting up there to get a bird's eye view definitely helps.
Always encourage guys, leave some strips, kind of thing if they can when we're sitting on the fence. 99 times out of 100 that they don't they don't want to know kind of either way, which sometimes can be frustrating. But in most cases, we do try and work with the farmer, right? Because I'm a big believer that there's the data and the science, but ultimately, as a farmer, there's a lot of emotion involved, right? And
yeah,
I do find, as long as growers are being reasonable, we'll support them on a replant, right? Because I think if you've invested all the time and money in the crop, it's nice to know that you tried and did something versus maybe regretting that decision at the end of the season, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Chris, thank you so much for joining me here on the Farmer Rapid Fire, brought to you by Pioneer Seeds Canada.